No, looks like Instagram's down again. I can't post. Yeah. Oh, hello. Happy birthday, America. 243 today. I can't believe it. Look at you. You are a stunning, stunning beast of a country. I didn't just say that, did I? I did. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Yes, I'm British, and I'm complimenting the United States on July the 4th, its birthday, even though it had that birthday at the expense of us British kicking us out like that. We apparently weren't invited to the party initially. With good reason, of course. Our empire was not always the nicest of empires, killing people indiscriminately. Ha ha ha! Shouldn't joke about that, especially on today of all days. And I've been giving some thought to this quite a bit, which is something that I do when I'm in the shower. What if the British had have won the War of Independence? Now, of course, any answer to that question is purely speculation. We don't know. We don't have that particular history because, well, it didn't exist. America did win the War of Independence. But what if it hadn't? What if Britain had, in fact, gained a stranglehold on the colonies and on this landmass in general? What would have happened? How would this country have turned out? So I think it would be interesting today just to speculate on a few of those things with a good amount of tongue-in-cheek, because this is your birthday, America. I don't want to ruin it for you. And in fact, I rather like your birthday. I've done 12 of them now. So that proves it to you. But speculation is speculation, right? So let's say the British win at Yorktown, or even earlier, and the war is declared in their favour. Firstly, you're going to have to put up with a lot of gloating from King George. He's that type, or was. He's dead now, a long time ago. Not only that, there have been a lot of things that he would have done. Yes, he would have said to the French, ha, it's ours. He would have said that to the colonists too. But not only that, there is precedent to suggest that he would have made life for the people living in this land economically hard. He'd already taxed quite heavily the people on tea and things like that, hence the Boston Tea Party. And so maybe he would have gone down that route again as kind of economic punishment, or in fact to pay back the reparations that came about as a result of the war thereafter. So already you would have had this young country under the reign of the British that was, instead of economically prosperous, quite the opposite of that. And so because of that, you're lacking for things like innovation, something that the United States has become quite well known for, of course. And, we'll touch on that in just a moment, I think. But what about the people involved? Some of the founders, right? Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Ben Franklin, all of that. Again, there's precedent to suggest here that they would have either been captured or killed, or captured and then killed. We could now be living in a world in which the names, not to mention, of course, the faces of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, don't roll readily off the tongue, and certainly aren't featured on money and, Mount Rushmore. A number of reasons that they wouldn't feature on money. Well, the money and currency would probably be different. I'd imagine, much like Canadian money, for example, it would feature the head of state of Britain. In other words, well, him at the time, but now, of course, Queen Elizabeth II. So there would be quite a sort of material change. And I mentioned that because we did a video on money and the heads that you see on money in both countries. That would be different, but that's like I said, a material change. Same with Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore, if in theory it existed, may well have featured also the heads of kings and queens, perhaps even prime ministers. And that's an interesting point as well, is that the other places that we've colonized, let's take Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, all use parliamentary systems of government. So it's likely that this landmass would have been governed perhaps by a prime minister and a sort of parliamentary system. So right away you'd have a different constitution of the United States. And on that point, in fact, it probably wouldn't be called the United States. And we might even be looking at counties or provinces or things like that. But the states that you know today would be completely different. The American-Mexican War, for example, which gave America, Texas may well still belong to Mexico, unless, history transpired that Britain ventured into there too, because we were very imperialistic and very ruthless. So the shape of America would have been different. Certainly the borders that we assign to those states would be demarcated differently. They wouldn't even be states. And then there's the question of westward expansion, which of course happened in American history, actual American history in the 19th century, the mid to late 19th century, of people living in what we know now as the United States, moving out west beyond the Mississippi River, and some of course coming from even Europe to do likewise. And that same zest for moving west might not have occurred, at least, not at the same way at the same time. We might have just sort of stayed there on the East Coast. We don't know. And the timeline of certain events would have been altered dramatically, I think, or even eradicated, perhaps. Take slavery, for example, which, of course, was a dark chapter in actual American history. But we abolished slavery before America did. There wouldn't have been that going on in this country necessarily as long as it did. That would stave off there then the Civil War in the United States, because you wouldn't have slave ownership. You also wouldn't have this conflict perhaps between the North and the South. You may have had other conflicts that may have arisen, and there's no ruling out the notion that, those living here at the time under British rule try to fight back against that British rule again. So that's a possibility that a war of that nature could have come about, and in itself could have been sort of a second war of independence, I suppose, or a civil war of sorts. Now that I've mentioned the Civil War, it's just sort of reminded me that Abraham Lincoln, may not have risen to prominence of any kind. None of the presidents, even if you were in a sort of parliamentary system, the history of the United States would have been changed in such a way that a little boy growing up in Illinois might not have been encouraged to go on to become the leader of the nation. It would have changed everything about the way people perceive their place in the world. Not to say it couldn't happen. The universe is a strange place. Innovation. America, of course, has sent rockets up into space. It sent a man to the moon. But they did so on the back of a lot of the technology that came about during World War II, where, they were one of the victors. World War II would have been different for the United States, or, should we call them the British New World. They might have been forced to enter the war far sooner, being under British rule, so in 1939, and if they weren't the economically prosperous nation that they've come to be, who's to say that they wouldn't spread their resources thin and therefore be part of the losing side during the Second World War and be of no help to Britain against the Nazis. If it comes out damaged and defeated from the Second World War, the space program doesn't have a launch pad to stand on, and so the Russians win that easily by sending a man into space. We're assuming in this alternate timeline that Russia is also doing well, but I suppose if America's on the losing side in World War II, then so is Russia. It's all confusing and very, very convoluted, but let's say that Russia wins the space race and then they dominate everything, they get to the moon. Still send the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin. Again, it's an alternate timeline. He might not exist. I don't know. And again, the war decimates this British New World, and this British New World is paying reparations to this very day for their involvement in World War II, and is not the most economically prosperous nation in the world. Along those lines, would we see Apple? Would we see Microsoft? Would we see this explosion of 20th century technology, which has absolutely revolutionized the way we see the world and the way we interact with each other? In fact, of course, without the United States, I wouldn't be able to do this video and just ponder what it would be like if the United States didn't exist. One thing I somehow forgot about, which is weird given that it's a primary focus of this channel, is language, the English language, and how it would be utilized. No predicting how it would have been different had the British won. It might not have been so different because, of course, America took a lot of its features, such as its rhoticism and vowel pronunciation, from Elizabethan English. So it's possible that it may well have kept that, but with a stronger British influence on the development of life here in the British New World. Who's to say that a lot of the quirks that were developing in British English at the time didn't transfer over here? Indeed, you might be influenced more heavily by British television than you are currently. I'm not saying that you're not. Obviously, you're influenced by this British television. Is it television? No, it's YouTube. Obviously, you do get British TV now, but think of it, if the British were completely in charge, that might be all you get. Over in Britain to this day, in fact, because America is such a strong and prosperous country, we get so many American TV shows. We're very aware of how you speak. In fact, that's why a lot of our British actors are so good, I think, at doing American accents. We hear them from, well, day one practically. So it could have been that in reverse. And so you might well have you might have spoken like me, then where would you be? All that to say, happy July the 4th, and I hope this video has really hammered home how much you should value your country's independence from my formerly evil country, from whom I distance myself, but not the current version of it. It's all, that's all in the past. Don't worry about it. We're friends. Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of Lost in the Pond. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe and